Hi there, today we got another batch of cucumbers from our garden that we're going to make some bread and butter pickles out of. So this beginning process is just going to be the same as we did a couple weeks ago when we made dill pickles. I'm just going to slice these as thin as I'd want them for pickle chips. After I get our cucumbers all sliced up and in the bowl, we're going to start working on our onion. This onion's a little on the older side, so it has a little bit of green in it. I'm just going to take that out. After the onion is all peeled, we're going to want to slice it as thinly as we can. Give these a good mix to combine. I'm going to add about a cup of ice, a quarter cup of sea salt, enough water to cover. And we're going to give that a good mix to dissolve the salt. And then we're going to let this sit in the fridge and marinate for at least 3 hours, but I end up doing it overnight. Now we're going to work on some dinner here. So tonight we're going to be using some of our garden fresh potatoes. I'm taking some of the ones that look a little, like they got to be used up first. They're looking a little rough. I'm just going to cut off all the bad spots and the green spots. I thought this potato looked pretty odd. Kind of looks like an embryo. I could say it looks like a slug. Either way, pretty interesting. We're going to cut off all the green here because we don't want to eat that. That'll make us sick to our stomachs. We still have lots of potatoes out in the garden to harvest. We've only harvested so far from our 2 volunteer potato plants that just popped up in the spring from our old compost from last year. And then we had a Ruth Stout method bed where I just put like some potatoes and some straw. They were Yukon Gold potatoes. That did pretty well. I think the ones that I grew in soil with a little bit of hay on top are going to do the best though. Those are the ones that we have yet to harvest from, and they've also been in the ground the longest, so I really think that those ones are going to do good. Those are the Kennebec variety, so they're supposed to be a bigger storage variety. White potato. This one's a Kennebec as well. I just took this one and a few others off of the top of the soil there in the bed that I was just talking about for our potatoes. Because they were starting to get green on top. They were exposed to sunlight and that makes them turn green. Like this one right here. They also have a bit of damage on them. I don't know if it's from the slugs. I think it might be the slugs because there's been a ton of slugs in our potato bed this year. And I just feel like they're probably just feeding on these tubers. And I also had last year a problem with chipmunks eating my storage potatoes, so it could be them as well, nibbling on them. We have a bad chipmunk problem here. So what I'm going to do with these is turn these into french fries, and I'm going to fry them in some peanut oil. I love using homegrown potatoes whenever possible. It just tastes so much more fresh. The only way I can describe it is like the difference between a garden fresh tomato and a store-bought tomato. You can just tell like how much more flavor is in the garden fresh. This one here looks like it started to rot out from the inside a little bit. That's okay, I'm just gonna cut that out and salvage as much of the potato as I can. And there's my little kitty cat jumping on the chair. This one here has quite a bit of damage on it. That's okay, we'll just cut that off. I usually don't peel my potatoes. I like to keep the skin on for French fries. But these ones were looking a little sad, so I'm going to go ahead and take the skins right off these. And this is what we end up with. Got a bunch of nice potato wedges. Just going to clean up my area real quick. We preserved this corn a little earlier in the season, and oh my goodness, this is like the best corn I've ever had. Especially for frozen corn, this does not compare to the flavorless store-bought. I just have some butter melting in our hot skillet. I'm gonna roast up the corn in this with some sea salt, and then we're gonna get started on our sloppy joes. I usually make, I shouldn't say usually, sometimes I make it from scratch, and it's very easy to do, but tonight I had this, so this is just what I'm gonna do. And this is how our fries came out with our potatoes. It is the next morning and I need some coffee. We've had our pickles in the fridge overnight, just marinating in all the salt and water. Daddy. And I made a little bit of a mess here, but that's what happens when you look at the camera instead of what you're doing. I'm gonna start with 1 cup of granulated sugar. 1 tablespoon of mustard seed. 1 teaspoon of celery seed, 1 teaspoon of turmeric, half a teaspoon of black peppercorns, and 3 cups of apple cider vinegar. The recipe says you can also use white vinegar in place of that. We're going to heat this mixture just to a boil and then turn off the heat and put a lid on it to keep it warm until we're ready for it. We have our jars all washed and ready. And now that our brine is ready, we're gonna just drain our cucumbers and onion slices, rinse them with cold water, and drain again, and then we're going to add that to our brine and let them warm up. I think I'll be adding turmeric to every batch of pickles that I make from now on because it just gives it that classic pickle look. And just keep in mind though that it will stain everything. So if you spill it, just wipe it up right away because I stained multiple things in the process of making this. Alright, so now we're gonna add our pickle mixture to our canning jars. We want to make sure we leave ½ an inch of headspace. And this is the point where I stain my countertop. I lost my debubbling tool, I have no idea what I did with it, so I'm just going to use this plastic kid's knife and just run around the edge, make sure we get all the bubbles released from the sides. Then you're going to want to push those pickles back down into the brine, and you're going to want to check your headspace again to make sure it is at ½ an inch of headspace, and if not, add a little bit more brine to correct that, or take a little out if you need to. Like here, I have a little too much in this one, so I'm just going to take it and put it into the other jars that are a little short. I put some white vinegar on this hand towel and I'm just going to wipe the rims, and as we're doing this is going to take all anything that might have gotten, any of the brine or anything sticky that might have gotten on the rim, it's going to take that off so we have a proper seal. And I'm also, as I'm doing this, looking for any nicks in the jars that would inhibit a proper seal as well. As I'm doing this, my son was playing with the celery seed over here, as you see. And he ended up adding a little extra to one of the jars, probably about a teaspoon extra, but that's okay. I scooped out as much as I could, but one's gonna have a little extra seasoning in it. Now that all our rims are clean, we are going to put the lids on, and then we are going to put the rings on. We're just going to tighten these to fingertip tight. So just as much as your fingers go without forcing it, just like that. And we're going to do that until they're all on, and then we're going to get these in the water bath canner, and these are going to process for 10 minutes plus 5 minutes for my elevation. Look up your elevation to figure out how much processing time you need. And you're going to want your water in your water bath canner to be the same temperature as your pickles or whatever you're putting into it. I just added some white vinegar. This is going to prevent any water stains from building up on the sides of the jar. When you get these jars out of the water bath canner, you're going to want to let them sit for 24 hours to make sure that they seal, and then take the rings off of them. Keep the rings off of them, do not store them with the rings on, and then test the seal by pulling up on the jar, and it shouldn't come loose. And then after that, what I do is I take a dish rag, and then I put some soap and hot water and some vinegar on it, and I scrub down the sides of the jar, and I scrub down the rim really nice, and just make sure it's all clean and not sticky, so when we're storing it, nothing's going to mold around the edges, and it's just going to be nice and clean. And the vinegar, once again, when you're washing it, it prevents those water stains from building up on the sides. So if you forgot that in the canning process, you can always wipe it down with vinegar when you're done. Let those completely air dry, and then store them in a dark, cool place. Like for me, I use my garage. Also, make sure your water is above an inch over the top of your jars, and mine are done processing, so I'm going to let them cool for 5 minutes with the lid off before taking them out. Make sure you label your jars. I'm going to label these with the date and bread and butter pickles. Thank you for spending time with me today as we fill up my pantry.